everybody, it's Brad. Today we are going to be creating an in the hoop project in Floriani Total Control U. We're going to make a book cover, basically something like this. Now this particular one is done on the Destiny using the IQ Designer, and I'm going to, and you can hold me to this, I'm going to eventually make a video on how to do this in the IQ Designer, but when I went to the class where I learned how to do this in IQ Designer, I was like, it would be really easy to adapt this into a Floriani Total Control U video, so that's what I'm doing. Basically, we are going to create kind of a template that you can make into anything you want. So it doesn't have to be just like this, where it's like a pattern. We can, and in fact what we're going to do is you can have words on here, words down the spine, all that kind of thing. So now I'm going to show you the stuff you're going to need and get it prepared, and then we're going to go to Floriani and actually create the design using the software. I am going to be making the design to fit this notebook here, but it'll work for pretty much any book. What you have to be aware of though is the size limitation of your machine. So if you have an Alissimo or a Destiny or something that has a hoop about that size, you could do something about this big, although actually 8.5 by 5. Yeah, you would have to have a Destiny actually to do something this big. So you might need a smaller book than this. But if you've got like like a paperback or something like that, you can do that. So you want to measure your book to get the measurements that you're going to need to actually do this. And remember that if you've got a hoop that isn't bigger than your maximum size, then you're not going to be able to do it. So you want to measure and check. So it says on this book that it's 8.5 by 5. So let's take a look at that. Put it right here, and 8. Yeah, it's pretty much 8.5. Let you check that. Pretty much 8.5 tall. Okay, and then we want to measure it width-wise like this because we need the cover to go over both sides of it. So let's see how far that goes. It's a little over 11 inches. It's like 11.25-ish inches down there. So we'll mark that down. That's 8.5 by 11.25 is the size of our notebook. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to get together is a piece of fabric that is big enough that it fits in your large hoop. In this case, I'm using the large Destiny hoop. So this is a 9.5 by 14 inch hoop. My piece of fabric is way bigger than it needs to be, but that's okay as long as it's big enough, then it will work. You also are going to need 3 10-inch square pieces of the same color. So I've got that here. Actually, I've got 4 just in case I ruin one somehow. And that is what you need. So you want to hoop up your big piece of fabric. Use a cutaway stabilizer to give it a little bit of stability. Like a medium weight cutaway, like 2 ounce would be fine. Now, what we're going to end up with is this. The embroidery gets done on the top here, and it is going to sew some pieces of fabric on as the last step, so that when you turn this inside out, it will have these little flappies, and this is all really easy to do digitizing wise, but I want to show you what the finished product is going to look like. I've got these little flappies here. There's going to be one on the other side too. We turn this back in that way, and then we will be able to just take our book there we go, like that, and the other side, and pull this seam out all the way. That's alright, you get the idea. This is, once I get these seams out all the way, then we can close it It looks like I've got a page caught in here. Oh wait, no, I just don't have this in all the way. There we go. Lovely. So now this one has all these decorative patterns on it in 4 pieces, and there's no specific design on the spine here. But the one that I sew out, because this takes forever to sew out all this, I'm going to sew out one that's not anywhere near this much complicated stuff on there. But you'll see how to add anything like this you want to the design when we start digitizing it, because we're basically going to make a template that we can then put anything we want on it. So the template is going to be just the sewing part of it, just the part that makes the physical cover, and then we'll be able to add any kind of decorations we want to it. It can be lettering or embroidery designs or whatever. So now I'm going to show you in the software how to actually do it, and then we're going to sew one of these things out and see how it works.
Okay, so here we are at the computer, and you open up your software. Going to go ahead and click Create a New Design. And so before we start, there's a couple of things that we want to do. Number one, we want to make sure that our grid is set up because we are going to actually be using the grid. And the grid is this background here, if you don't know, where we've got the dashed lines and the solid lines. And so to set up our grid the way that I want it set up today, we are going to right-click up here where these numbers are. And first we're going to set this. The default is in metric. So if yours is in metric right now, change this to inches. Then we're going to set up the actual grid line. So we're going to right-click again, go down here to Grid Settings, and we're going to change here where it says spacing. Right now it's converting from metric, so it's this big long 0.3937. That's not what we want. We want the spacing to be 0.25, and also the same on the vertical, 0.25. Okay, the default color for our grid is this light gray. We're going to change that to black for reasons that will become apparent later. And then grid major, that's the solid lines, because we have this in 1/4 inch increments. We're going to set this to 4, which will give us a solid line every 1 square inch. And I'm going to go ahead and change this color to black as well. You can change them to essentially any colors you want, really. I just like to have black for both of those. And we're going to hit OK. Alright, so now my grid is set up the way that I want it, if you want, you can also change the background color. I don't like having a white background. I like it to be a different color than white because I work with a lot of white objects and it makes it hard to see them. So I'm going to change this button down here where it's got like a bucket being dumped onto a computer screen. We're going to click on that and click on color, and I'm going to choose this light gray color, and that is why we changed our lines, our dashed lines. If they were that light color gray, they'd be invisible now because it's the same color. Anyway, so we've got our environment set up the way that I want it, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just draw a rectangle. And it doesn't matter the dimensions of the rectangle that you bring in, as long as it is a rectangle that you bring in with this tool here. When you hover your mouse over it, it says rectangle by default. If you click on it, a flyout menu comes out, and we have these different shapes to choose from. We want this one, rectangle. So we're going to left click on that, and then just move your mouse somewhere in your design field and left click and drag like this. It doesn't matter what the size ends up being. We just left click and drag to bring that in. And now we've got our rectangle in our design field. Go up to the select tool, which is this one here. It's the first one on the left hand toolbar. We're going to left click on the select tool, and that will highlight our rectangle that we just brought in. So that's nice. And what we want to do is we want to resize this. And the way we do that is if you look in your properties menu right over here, right now we're on a tab that says artwork. And if you notice, there's a tab right next to that that says transform. We want to left click on the transform tab. Okay, now if you look, this is giving me this size in metric right now, and this is America where we use inches. So we're going to change that right here where it says millimeters. We're going to put a check mark next to inches. And let's see if I can recall correctly. When I took my measurements of my notebook, it was 8.5 inches tall by 11.25 inches wide, I think. I'm going to add a half an inch to both of those measurements. And before I do, I want to uncheck this check here next to maintain aspect ratio. If I type in a value with maintain aspect ratio checked, so if I change this to say 10, or 100, if I change this to say 10 inches wide and then hit apply here, it will actually scale my height for me so that it retains the same shape. Oops, I didn't mean 88. Boom, see how it's changing the height when I do this? So what we want is to be able to set both of these individually, and the way we do that is removing the check mark next to maintain aspect ratio. So our width was what, 11.25, so I'm going to set it to 11.75, and that'll give us a little bit of wiggle room for the cover to have. You don't want to set it to the exact dimensions. You want it to be a little tiny bit bigger. So we're going to set that to 11.75. The other one to what, 8? No, 9.25. 9.25. Wait, did I? No, I want this to be 9. I'm sorry. I don't have the measurement sitting in front of me, so I'm just going off of memory. So half an inch taller and a half an inch wider, and then we're going to hit apply. Boom. And there we go. So it's just so big that I couldn't see it all on my screen at once. And when we zoom out to be able to see the entire shape, there's kind of a small problem, and that is that it is difficult for me to see this because the line is so skinny when I'm zoomed out this far. There is a way to fix that, though. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually make our lines a little thicker so that we can see them better. And to do that, we're going to click over here in our sequence view. I'm going to click on my lone object, which is my rectangle. And right here where it has pen width, right now it's at 0. We're going to change this value to 2 and hit apply. Now that doesn't do anything other than make my line look thicker. It doesn't make the eventual design that we make any thicker at all. It just is purely to make it easier for us to see. And yeah, so that is why I did that, so you can actually see it. Anyway, if we want to make this as zoomed in as possible and not, you know, basically, if we want to have this as big as it can possibly be on our screen, there's a way to do that. If you go up here to this where it has our amount of zoom that we're at, if we click this and choose to fit, that lets us see the entirety of our design without having to know offhand that it's 80% is the level of zoom that'll do that. So that's something handy. So anyway, what we want to do now is this is the entire area of what is going to be our book cover. Okay, so you figure the middle of it, that's where the spine of the book is going to be, and then there's kind of like a front cover and a back cover. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to draw little dividing lines and divide the spine from the two covers. And that way we can put like, like a word or something down the spine of the book and have like a little divider that divides those sections. To do that, we need to find the middle of our rectangle. And if you look on my ruler, you see 0 is right here. So 0 on our ruler is not where the center of our rectangle is, and that's because we drew the rectangle in kind of wherever and then resized it. So what we want to do first, before we start doing other stuff, is actually center the rectangle to our rulers. And the way you do that is we need to select it. So you can either left click it in the design field or click it over here in our sequence view. And we want to go up to this tool here that says align. And if you left click on this, you get all these different options come out. And one of those options is center to rulers. So when we left click on this, boom, now center of our rulers, where 0 is on our ruler, there and there, that is dead center of our rectangle. And I'm just going to go ahead and refit our design because it changed where we were looking when we did that. So let's see. So the spine of our book, I didn't measure this, but I think it's around like an inch wide. So we'll just go with that. So what we're looking for is we want to have 2 lines that form 1 inch of space on the inside of this. So if we look at our 0, we can see that this mark here is a half an inch going this direction. This mark here is a half an inch going this direction. So that's where we want to have our lines. And there's a convenient way we can bring in little guides to tell us that. And that is if we go over into our vertical ruler over here, move our mouse in there, and then left click and hold down the button. Look what I can do. I just dragged out a little guideline, and I'm going to put it right on here. And see how it highlights in yellow when I'm on one of my grid lines? That way I know I'm in exactly the right spot. We're going to do the same thing one more time. We're going to move over to the ruler, left click, and drag over to our half inch mark on this side, and then let go when it turns yellow. So if you've got them in the right place, your guidelines will be yellow. Okay? So the next thing we're going to do is we want to set the things that we draw to lock to these guidelines. And the way you can do that is go over to your rulers, either the one on the left or the one on the top, right click and choose Snap to Guidelines right here. That way, when we go to draw our lines in for this, it'll automatically want to snap to these guidelines and make sure that we draw a perfectly straight line. So we're going to go up to our line tool. That's this one with the little green barbells. I'm going to left click on that, and we're going to move close to our first guideline, left click one time, and then we're going to drag down and we're going to left click on the bottom. And we've got a perfectly straight line because we told it to snap to the guidelines. Once we get those 2 points in, you're going to right click, and then we're going to draw our next line in. Start here, drag down to the bottom, get it lined up, and left click. And we've got our second perfectly straight line. We're going to right click to generate that, and then go ahead and choose our select tool. Once we do that, we see that we've actually got these 2 new artwork segments in our sequence view. Select the first one that's not your big rectangle, the first one that kind of has an empty space next to it, and then hold the control key on your keyboard and click on the second one. So that way we select both of those objects. And let's do the same thing we did to a rectangle so we can see these more easily. Set the pen width up here to 2 millimeters and hit apply. There we go. So now we can see our lines perfectly, and they're in there just lovely. Now we could go in, and if we wanted to, we could add decorations in here and stuff, or we can just begin digitizing these 2, which I think that's what we'll go ahead and do. I think what I want for these is I want to use a Motif Stitch, and there's a couple different ways we can achieve the look that I wanna go for. So let's select these 2 pieces again. Just select the first one, hold down Control, and select the second one. We've got them both highlighted. And then down here at the bottom, we have our different digitizing tools. We are going to make these a Motif Stitch, which is this one right here. When you hover over it, it'll say Run Motif. And boom, there we go. We've got a Motif Stitch already pre-done and ready to go because the default motif will be chosen right here. So we could go in and choose one of these out of this lineup. Pick whichever one we want. So I want like candle wicking, I could do that. We get these little nice motif stitches. Now these, you could have these be satin stitches, they don't have to be motif, they could be anything you want. So you can go through and play with the different motifs and see whether you think any of those look good. We can also do variable sizes in here, although I would probably not do that. I would probably do these with straight lines, but we can go in and play with these, see what different setting. Actually, that looks really cool. Oh geez, I wish I hadn't already sewn out my sample because that looks really quite awesome. Okay, so well, what this variable size setting here does is it, as you can see, right now it's going from smaller to larger, and we can set these different values. So here it's going to go from small to large, going this way. If we set linear decreasing, it's the opposite. For this particular thing, I think either convex or concave are going to look the best, which actually that looks pretty darn slick. Let's see how it looks concave. Yeah, I like it better the other way. But so you can see you can mess around with these and figure out what you think is going to look best. And then we also have this new option down here, which is a steel run stitch, which will do a run stitch on top of a steel. Um, and for our run, we can choose it to be a motif. So we can actually have a satin stitch and a steel stitch at the same time. So all this is it's dividing this area, so you can pick whatever kind of stitch you want for this part of it. It's entirely up to you what that's going to be. So you can play around with that, play around with different types of stitches. I'm going to do, you know what, I actually really like that one that I had before with the candle wicking. Where were my candle wicking stitches? Here we go. And I'm going to do linear, no, I'm going to do convex and hit apply. And turn the 3D off so we can see that a little nicer. Actually, that's not the one that I had. I must have had this one. Yeah, I think that looks neat. Anyway, oh, and the other thing, you can adjust the pattern size here. So if you change this value, it's going to make each individual one of these a little bit bigger. So if I set this to be, say, 6 millimeters and hit apply, then my my largest ones get a little larger. And you can also adjust the stitch length too, which is going to change the way that things look a little bit. You can also change the spacing between them. So if I want them to be farther apart, I can do that. And then if I want them closer together, I think I can set this to a negative value. Let's see, -1, hit apply. And no, it actually doesn't. You can't get them any closer together. Oh well. So anyway, that's this part. So this is going to be kind of making a border for the spine of our book. Now, so if we want to go ahead and bring in a fill to fill in the front cover of our book, we can do that. And what I did for my sample that I'm actually sewing out is I did a stippling fill in there. And the way you would do that is you need to have a smaller rectangle that's inside our current rectangle, right? That's how you would achieve that. So we have to go in and use our rectangle tool. And I am going to just go ahead and draw mine in like this. And just make sure that I end up kind of right in the middle of my line. And now I've got this new rectangle. So I am going to go in and set this to be, say, a stipple. So down here, this is my Autostipple. Just waiting for it to fill in. If your software ever does this to you, did you see where it flashed a couple of times? It seemed like it was going to crash, and it said not responding up in the top, up in the bar up here. If I had hit a button or clicked or something, it would have crashed the program. So if you're ever sitting here and it's taking longer than you think it should, don't start clicking because it will crash the program. Usually, if you just wait long enough, it'll work. So this amount of stippling is a lot, and when I made my sample that you're going to watch me sew out, I chose to make this less dense than this because I didn't want to have to sit there and watch it sew out for super, super long. So the way you adjust the density is you go in here and change this value, and I think on the one that I actually sewed out, I had it at 6 millimeters. Yeah, that looks about right. But you can change have it more dense or less dense or however you want. So say this is what I wanted to do. I just want to have stippling on the front and back, super simple. That's what I actually do in my sample that I do. I could take this one that exists right now. If I want to just have this on the back, I can right click and copy and then right click and paste to have a second one. And then to make sure that I don't accidentally move it up and down, I can then hold down the control key on my keyboard and shift it to the left or to the right. See how it's shifting it a little bit at a time? And then if you hold the button down, it kind of like pauses, and then when you let go, it moves it the amount that you moved it. So this is one way, if you're not good with the mouse, to move it only along one axis at a time. Um, I'm just going to pick it up and move it because I'm pretty handy with the mouse. But if you want to just nudge it a little bit, one way or the other, holding down the control key on a selected object nudges it. Okay, so that's just a tip you can take with you there. So we've got stippling here on the front and back, right? And then I want to actually add some lettering to this too. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our text tool, left click on that, and choose our capital letter T. And we're just going to left click somewhere, anywhere, and it brings in the default text is just my text. And then under font here, we can choose, say we want to choose a handwritten font. We can go into this little categories, outline, small block. These are all the different types of fonts. We'll pick handwritten, and then from the handwritten selection, we can pick one of these. So say I like this hopscotch font. We'll go in here and say that I'm making a journal cover for Meadow or something. We'll type in Meadow and then hit enter. Journal, just like that, and we'll hit apply. Okay, so there we go. Now this is, we can move our mouse over this and see when it becomes a little hand, that's when you can move it. We can see that this is a little bit too big for my space. So to see whether or not you can make this font bigger or smaller, we can take a note here. The height right now is 0.98 inches, basically 1 inch. And if we hit this question mark, then this comes up and it's going to show us our minimum and maximum. So we can definitely make this a little bit smaller because the minimum height is 0.39. Right now it's a 0.98. So we know that we can set this to something smaller. So let's see what this looks like at 0.65 and hit apply. Okay, that looks good. We can now move this into place. Perfect. And now we want to have it say that going vertically down the spine as well. So we're going to go back to our capital letter T for text, and we're going to use our text tool again. We're going to left click somewhere. It remembers the font that we chose, so that's good. We can change that if we wanted to. We're going to type in this time all in one line. Meadows Journal. Okay, and we're going to set this. We'll see how it looks at the minimum height, which was, I think, 0.39. And we'll hit apply. Okay, we could go bigger than that, but this will definitely fit on there. So what we want to do is rotate this 90 degrees, and that's this tool right here, rotate right. We'll left click on that, and then we can move this into position on the spine of the book. Cool. So, and we know we could make this a little bit bigger if we wanted to, so maybe make this 0.45 and see how that looks. Still looks okay. And basically, we're almost done here to turn this into an embroidery design. The last thing that we need to do before this is ready to do is this, our very first thing that we drew. This needs to be moved to the last. This has to be the last thing. We're going to right click on it and move. We're going to move it last. It's coming off of my screen so you can't see it, but we're going to choose last from that little menu that comes out. And then we need to do two more things. We need to change the color. So this thing has to be a different color than whatever the previous part was. So I'm going to just go and make it, let me change my color chart to something that has less colors in it. We're going to make it red, okay? And then we're going to make it a run stitch. And we're also going to go ahead and make it a double run stitch and hit apply. Okay, so our last stitch is going to be a color that's not in the rest of the design. So all these other things could be different colors. It doesn't make any difference. This could be pink. You know, the stippling parts could all be pink if we wanted. And the lettering could be, you know, a different color than this stitching if we want to. All that doesn't matter. You know, all these different color changes are fine, although of course we made the stippling like impossible to see. Let's choose a darker color. Okay, you know, we could make this a different color. It doesn't matter. What matters is the last color has to be a color that's different from the preceding one because we need the machine to stop for sure before it sews out this color, okay? And if you're sewing this on a multi-needle machine, you got to make sure you put in a reserve stop before that. So, because this is the key to the whole thing. And you'll see that when we sew it out, that that's the key. But at this point, this is now a design that is ready to save and ready to turn into a little notebook cover. So you can do this if you want to follow along exactly with how the rest of my video is going to be. And you can skip ahead a few minutes if you want to get straight to how to actually put this thing together, because I'm just going to show you a couple other things that you can do instead of just filling this in with stippling. So maybe we want to have something other than stippling for our filled in parts here. Let's take these. We'll take the front page here, and we're going to convert this to a Motif Fill, okay, which is this guy right here. We're going to left click on that, and we're going to put in a Motif Fill to fill that in. Now the default here is super, super dense, right? We sew this out. It's going to take forever to sew this out. That just added like 30,000 stitches to the design. So what we can do though is we can take our fancy fills and we can increase their pattern sizes. So let's just stick with the one that's the default for right now. We change this pattern size from 5 millimeters. Let's see what it looks like at 15 millimeters and hit apply. See how that's much less dense? Isn't that cool? Like the way that this pattern kind of looks, you can actually see what the pattern looks like a little bit better the larger it is. So, and you can do interesting things with these. So let's make this even bigger. We'll set this to 20. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take this same thing. We're going to copy and paste this. So copy and paste. Let's drag it so that it's back in sequence. And we're going to change the properties of the second one. First, let's change the color to something else. And then let's change the properties of our pattern. We'll leave the same pattern up, and we'll make one of them 15 millimeters and one of them 20 and see what we do. So there we go. We've created this cool two-tone look. Put it in 3D, maybe we can see it a little bit better. We've created this cool two-tone look, and that can be done with any of the motif stitches. You make them larger, and you could layer them on top of each other and make the different layers different sizes, and it makes cool, interesting patterns. So that is a really neat way you can do this. And the way that I do it, the way that it's done in the Destiny version of this, where you do it all digitizing in the class, the instructions that I have for that splits the book cover actually into 4 pieces and basically does this inside of each piece. It doesn't have a little spine part to it, but the beauty of this is really, as long as you have this running stitch that goes around that's the right size for your notebook, the stuff that's inside of here, all bets are off. It's whatever you want. Whatever you want on the cover of this book is what you're going to put in here. I like the idea of dividing the spine out because it makes it so that you have a really easy division of what's going to be on the front, what's going to be on the back. So we could go in and maybe we don't want to have this stippling on this side. Maybe we want to have a poem or a Bible verse or something down on the back of this. We could just go in and use this space to, have like a personalized little thing on there. Like we could say we want to have small fonts and we want to put in our favorite poem. However you wanted to do it. I'm not into poetry. A road diverged in the woods, something to that effect. I don't know. And we'd want something bigger than that probably, but you get the idea. It doesn't matter. It can be anything I want. So that is something cool. Let's see. What else did I want to show you? Why not just import embroidery designs into this space? You could totally do that too. We could go into our library here and look at our free monthly designs. Maybe, it's a Christmas present. You want to look at December designs, and maybe there's some, or I think they put them in like November. Let's look under the designs. Oh, here we go. So we've got little Christmassy things in here. Let's see, what's this? We'll drag this in, and we've got this design. We can rotate it, and we could have this be the back of the book if we wanted to. or it could be from Grammy, or whatever you want it to be. That's what's so cool about this. Anyway, so I know you don't know what I'm talking about by saying that this line is the key to the whole thing, but that's what sews this whole thing together. And if you want to see how it works, keep watching this video.
Okay, I've got my fabric in my hoop. I've got the embroidery design up. We're just going to go ahead and sew this design out. And then once it gets to the part where I have to show you how it works, we're going to stop and I'll explain thoroughly how to put the fabric down to make the flaps. And we'll be ready to rock and roll. So let's go ahead and hit this start button. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the old fast forward button. And that way you don't have to watch this whole thing sew out in real time. Okay, once your design is done sewing out up to the final part, which is just the big red circle, or big red square rather, that goes around it, you want to take your 2 of your 10-inch squares and fold them over. Might not be a bad idea to press them. So we'll take the first one, and you want to lay it in the hoop with the folded side facing in. And the raw edges should be just about touching the hoop if you're using this hoop. If you're using a different size hoop, you want to just make sure that you have about 3 inches where it covers the embroidery. So just make sure that we got about 3 inches here, and we do. So that is going to work just fine. So I'm going to get that lined up. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So this has to go with the folded side facing in, and if you're using the 9.5 by 14 hoop on a Destiny to do this, then having it touching, just barely touching the end of the hoop is going to make it just about in the right spot. And then the last thing is you're going to take your third 10-inch square, and you want to have it lined up so that it is perfectly in the center. What you can do is you can actually mark dead center of this thing, which I just went and did. So I've got little marks at the center point, and then you line those up with the little marks on your hoop that indicate the center. So let me get my thing in here. You want to make sure you don't mess up your other pieces though while you're doing this. Okay, and you just want to make sure that it's totally covering up the embroidery. Okay, if you want to make sure that it's straight enough that it's covering the embroidery. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but as long as it's covering the embroidery, you're good. All right, and then the last thing you'll probably want to do is put a little bit of tape down, just painter's tape or masking tape, on the corners here, so that the foot doesn't catch these corners. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Alright, I went and got some tape, and let's see, I'll put some tape down kind of like this, probably good enough. A little bit back here. And you're just doing this to make sure that the end of the foot doesn't get caught when it comes to sew around here. And we should just be able to just tear this tape away when we're done. So that ought to work. And at this point, we should be able to just sew out this last color. Now, if I was doing this for real, I probably would have threaded a color that matches the fabric. I'm not going to do that though. It'll be fine. Alright, so we sew out the last color and we should be good to go after that, but you definitely do want to watch it just in case. Here, look, my tape came up. Just in case, you want to make sure that if it's going to catch, that you stop it before it does. or just after it does. So I'm keeping my finger near the button, just in case it looks like it's gonna catch. There, it caught. Okay, so if this happens to you, where it gets caught like that, it's okay, don't panic, it's not the end of the world. You're gonna cut with the scissor key. So I didn't have it adequately taped. All right, so we've cut it. We're gonna pull this out of the way here. See, I should have been faster. I was relying on my tape too much to have worked. This would be more impressive if I hadn't just screwed it up though, huh? All right, and then we're going to go in and rip out these stitches. Seam ripper would be ideal. Okay, and then fasten our hoop back in here. Then I'm going to want to more securely tape my fabric down and keep it from catching. That's probably a little bit overkill, but if something's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. And then don't forget that we have to back up a little bit. So on the machine, you're going to want to go in and, here we go, back it up some stitches. I'm going to back it up so that it's definitely going to be back in the right place. And then go ahead and hit the start button back up here. And it's wanting to catch on this again. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. You can actually go in and raise the height of the presser foot, which I probably, in retrospect, should have done before I started this. But I'm not starting over again now, so you'll just have to bear with me. So on a Destiny, you can go in here, and on one of these pages, embroidery foot height. The default is, what, 0.06? I'm going to raise it up to 1/10 of an inch and see whether that doesn't help. Here we go. I didn't show that on camera, but I just pushed the tape back under, and we should be good to go. There we go. See how you probably can't see it in the picture, but my foot is actually floating a little bit higher than it was. So it's going to come back down this way, and it's catching on my tape. I guess I chose really bad quality tape, but that's all right. I'm just going to peel this tape out of the way because I think this will be fine with the presser foot height a little higher now. I'm just going to come back around here. I'm going to try and hold this down. Hopefully I don't run over my finger. That wouldn't be good. There we go. Nothing like trying to do your video in one take, huh? Alright, so it's going to come back around. Now, I did have it do a double run here. It was probably unnecessary to do that in retrospect. But it's going to come back and go over the line one more time because I did tell it to do a double run. And then once this is done, then we can pull this out of here and see what the result is. Hopefully it fits my notebook. Wouldn't that be impressive? And that's that. All right, I'm going to take this over to the cutting table and we can look at it a little more closely. Okay, so we've got our finished product here. We're just going to unhoop this. Oh, come on, Brad. Just pop it out. There we go. I'm just going to unhoop this. Now, I told you to use cutaway, and then I went and used tearaway, just because that's what I had laying around. So mine's just going to tear out here. I would prefer to have used cutaway. This was what I had laying around already in the hoop, so I didn't feel like cutting some cutaway because I'm lazy. So basically what we got to do here is we need to trim about 1/4 inch away from our final sewn seam here. So if you've got blue tape in there, just tear that out. See, that tears away nice and easy. I think my painter's tape that I was using is about 30 years old or so. So if you have some brand new tape, it probably would hold a little bit better than mine did. And then I'm going to grab some scissors. These are terrible scissors. Well, that's what I got. So we are going to grab, oh my god, look, these don't even cut. What kind of sewing machine store is this? These should go in the trash. Anyway, we're going to cut close to the seam. You want to make sure that you don't accidentally cut that running stitch though. Okay, cut the excess here. Yes, I know I'm wasting a lot of fabric. I'm sorry. Make sure you can see me. All right. Ooh, these scissors are also terrible, but not as terrible as the other ones. Okay. There we go. One last line here. Okay. All right. There we go. Now we just turn it right side in. Let's see. Turn this through here. And then flip these around like this. Like that. You got to get them all the way pushed out, or it gets kind of rumpled. Okay. We'll flip this side around. Okay. Pretty good. Our notebook. One side. Other side. Still a little rumpled here, but there we go. Got the stippling around it, the lettering on the spine. So that's really easy to make something like this. Now, I think that a lot of the rumpling here is a result of using a lighter stabilizer than I should have, and also that I didn't press my material before I used it. So the material was already a little bit rumpled in the hoop. But yeah, that's pretty cool. In the hoop, made in the software. And this, like I said, this could be as decorative as you want it to be. I did this because I don't want to be here all night sewing out this sample for my class. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys go and make your own cool things. And remember, I promise, eventually make the tutorial for how to digitize this same thing, which is this guy, on the Destiny itself. on the IQ Designer without using any software at all. But I figured I'd go ahead and make one in Floriani because I knew it'd be pretty easy and that'd be a good class. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.